Hi guys, my name is Kim. So Donald Trump is our president. He's said a lot of controversial things and he supports a lot of controversial policies, and amongst probably the main one is about the border wall. And I'm here to prove to you that President Trump's border wall will have negative consequences on the country by showing you that the construction of the new border will have harmful economic consequences for Americans. 2, the new border will disrupt numerous lives, and 3, the wall will fuel anti-immigration sentiments. So 1, the construction of the new border will have harmful economic consequences to Americans. So this wall that President Trump has proposed will be about 1,900 miles long. 1,000 miles will be covered by the actual wall, and the remainder will be covered by natural obstacles. President Trump claims that this wall will cost about $10 billion. However, this seems unlikely, even coming from his side. Senator Mitch McConnell, also the majority leader, estimates that this will cost about $12 to $15 million. And part of the reason is that this isn't just a construction of wall. It has to do with maintenance. It has to do with hiring more border control. And just to give you an idea, if we look at the past, the idea of walls hasn't been implemented just now. It's been since our history, and the Bush administration actually implemented a fence that cost around $2.4 million, according to a report by CNBC. And at the time, the Deputy Chief of Border Patrol for U.S. Customs and Border said, quote, "It's a lot more expensive than we expected when we started and much more difficult." And part of that goes to what I said just before that. And so we have all of these costs laid before us, and the main question is, how is it going to be paid? And one of the most popular ways going around right now is this idea that Mexico will pay for the wall. And that is basically a buffet of ideas on how they're going to do that. The main one is importing the tax on imports. So one of the misconceptions is that this tax will be placed on Mexican companies, but in actuality, it's most likely going to be put on U.S. companies that are going to be taxed, and they're just going to increase the taxes of their goods, so we would end up paying those taxes. And even if the Mexican companies did pay for those taxes, they would just increase their prices to the U.S. companies, and then that would affect us. And according to the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, we imported about 316.4 billion of goods from Mexico, and this includes vehicles, machinery, mineral fuels, medical instruments. So a lot of these things that would be raised in taxes are everyday tools and supplies that we need and we use, and it would mostly affect lower income Americans. So our second point is the border will disrupt numerous lives. So one of the most popular issues going around, and a recent one, is this issue of conservation. So a lot of wildlife specialists, including Jeff Corwin, argues that the impact will be huge. It will be an environmental catastrophe, end quote. He says that it will disrupt nature's corridor through North and South America, and at least 89 endangered species will be affected, according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And that's because the wall will cut through huge paths and national parks of wildlife. It'll affect the routes that they take when weather changes and migration blocks. And part of these animals that would be affected are jaguars, Mexican gray wolves, which are actually the most endangered subspecies in the world, according to the Defenders of Wildlife. And not only would this affect animals, this would also affect Americans. So the wall would seal some Americans on the Mexican side of the border, technically still on U.S. soil, because when you construct the wall, it can't be on Mexico's territory, it has to be within the U.S. And this does affect lives, including a story of Elisa Tamiz, who spent 7 years prior to try to stop the government to run a fence through her property. And this property she had with her family since the 1700s, so it's a property that has a history. Essentially, the government won, and they agreed on a settlement, but she's worried that with this new wall, there will be more issues, and she says, quote, "I probably have one more decade to live, and I had one decade to torture. I think if they start the business again, I don't know how much fight I'll have left in, and I'm going to fight to the end. And the third claim is that the wall will fuel anti-immigration sentiments. So from 2012 to now, according to Pew Research, there's actually been more immigrants leaving the country than there has been coming in. And this idea that some of these undocumented immigrants are all criminals is just not true. Pew Research actually did a report that said 1.6% of immigrant males aged from 18 to 39 are incarcerated, compared to 3.3% of native-born. So basically, with all this data, this idea that we need a wall to protect us is just not supported, and it takes away priorities from things like education or healthcare. So I hope that with these arguments, I've convinced you guys that President Trump's border wall will have negative consequences on the country. Thank
All right, good stuff. The proposition's clear. There's an excellent preview. They're all phrased as secondary claims, so you're in a good start there. When you get to the individual points, you start talking about them, and I thought that you did an okay job, although the first point on the impact on the economy rests primarily on how much the wall is going to cost, and $10 million, I think it's $1 billion. At one point you said million, and I'm sure that you were talking about billion. So $10 billion is Trump's estimate. McConnell says it's going to cost 12 to 15. Again, I think it's billion is what it's supposed to be, and you said million. I'm sure that it's $1 billion. So the question then becomes, well, how significant is that $15 billion on the economic system? And I'm not sure that you do anything that shows that that's going to be an important or significant impact. The government spends a lot of money, and the notion that this $15 billion is going to make the difference on all those other things that you suggest right at the end of the speech, I think, is problematic. You don't really have any development of that argument. So if this is the issue that's going to be about cost, then I think you need to develop it a lot more. I think the stronger arguments have to do with the impact that it might have on trade between the United States and Mexico, the potential impact that it's going to have on taxes if we're going to try and get Mexico to pay for it by changing our tax structure. I think that there could be some economic consequences, and I think that's where that argument needs to be developed, a little bit more extensively. The notion that it's going to be disruptive, it's interesting that they've got these environmental arguments that are being presented. I think they are not a bad way to get started. I do think you could use a little bit more information on this. The Mexican gray wolves, for instance, that get mentioned, I'm wondering, okay, well, how many of them are affected by the wall? And in what way are they affected by the wall? Are they coming across the border and they hunt on one side and go back to the other side, or they just they move back and forth, and it's, is there no place for them to live? That there's going to be a disruption. I think that's probably true of anything that's going on, any kind of construction that you build. The fact that it's going to hurt them, cause them to end or fail or something like that, I think you need a little bit more information on this. I think you've got a good start, but you've only taken one step on that road, and I think you need a little bit more on that. The argument about it being disruptive to people's property, you've got this example of this woman who's got a problem with the property that she's got. It's not very clear exactly what her problem is, except that she doesn't want the fence or the wall. Outside of that, I'm not sure how this works. There's kind of a suggestion that in order to be able to build it, that they would be on the wrong side of the wall. I could see that would be problematic, but again, that's not even what this example says. So I'm not sure how that one proves that particular point. I think that's a little bit problematic. And then you get off on some tangential issues concerning whether or not there's a necessity for it. I think that's a different question. Your argument is whether or not the wall is going to work, not whether or not it's necessary. And I think that you ought to be focusing on that instead. Okay, thank you.